Good morning, Stephen. How are
Good morning.
you?
Pretty good. I'm home. That's really nice. I was away all of last week, as some of you may know, because you missed me so badly. I
We
missed a
did miss
Feuertip,
you, Stephen.
but I was
We
visiting
missed your.
my mom. And don't tell her I did this. Oh, share my
Okay,
screen, please.
I'll share your screen.
There's my
Oh,
mom.
there's your mom.
She's 88. She's up on her feet. She's doing well, working hard. So we're really pleased with how that's going. And you can stop sharing my screen. Thank you. So that's what I did. And it was my usual experience in Florida. It's always great to see my mom. Florida as a place to be is, wow, strange. So, they're
Wait,
destroying the
we
wetland.
might have. Hopefully, we have some people from Florida watching, so you should be careful what you say.
Careful. Hopefully they'd feel the same way as me. Like a lot of places, it's just psychotic. I mean, there's lots of natural beauty, and mostly what they're doing is chewing up the planet and sticking in lots of old people who are being warehoused. So it's weird. But anyway, I went out to a park nearby. I go out and find natural areas, and I found this really great John Prince Park, and it had a fairly undeveloped area, not fields for play and so forth. Started walking through, started picking up garbage. Came back the next day with gloves and a bag so I could really do a job on it. And I went off into some of the side trails that people just make off the main trails. And I was down there picking up some trash, and I heard this low grumbling like a motorboat starting. And then it did it. I'm thinking, no, that doesn't sound like a motor. That sounds like a growl. So like 20, 30 feet away from me, there was some sort of really big cat lying in the brush. And I just decided I'd back away quietly and slowly.
Okay, so you never saw it.
No, and I did not want to see it. I definitely did not want to make eye contact with a large cat in the wild.
That could have been. Oftentimes, I find they sound scarier than they are. It was probably some like little raccoon or something. Have you ever heard raccoons fight? They're scary sounding.
It was a very loud sound. It sounded like a big animal, but you're right. Could be all anyway.
Yeah.
In any case,
good you ran away.
So I respected that. I went off and played with the turtle, or I found a really big turtle too, and iguanas, and yeah. So Florida was great, but it's great to be back with my dogs. Don't have any on my lap now. I actually have another dog staying over with us this week, so it's pretty hectic. But let's talk about PL SQL, shall we?
Let's talk PL SQL.
Because I know people love to hear me just blather on and on, but eventually they have to justify their visit here. Okay,
there you go.
So I thought I'd talk today about set-based features in PL SQL, which is a procedural language. So to give you a little bit of background, and I'll be publishing a blog post later today that talks about this in a bit more detail. I'm sure everybody knows, though, if you're new to the technology, you can pretty easily skip over this, the core beauty and value of SQL. So I started way back in 1987, read Codd's 12 Rules and so on and so forth. So some of these ideas were just like front and center in everybody's mind then. But the biggest idea about SQL is that it's declarative. Well, there are two big things. It's declarative and set oriented. So declarative means you tell the engine what you want. You don't tell it how to do its job, right? Give me these rows and columns. I don't care how you do it. Change the name to uppercase. I don't care how you do it. That's your job. And that separation of telling the computer what we need instead of programming it was, I think, a major breakthrough for data management because it just makes sense from a data standpoint. And the other major thing is that it's set oriented. It's based on a mathematical foundation of sets and interactions between sets that gives it, I think, gives it the longevity and the power that had made SQL what it is today. Very cool. But pretty soon after SQL was released in Oracle database, what Oracle folks found is that all the developers were writing C programs on top of the SQL. And then if they had to move that C code from machine to another machine, a different operating system, they had to change the C code. And Oracle thought, well, that's kind of silly. SQL's the same all over. Why would they have to change their code? So they decided to build PL SQL sort of on top of SQL, the procedural language extensions. That was back in the late 70s, early 80s, right? No, late 80s, early 90s. Yeah. So by early 90s, it was out. Anyway, and the idea was that you can't really build a complete application in SQL, or even PL SQL, we know that today. But anyway, now you could build your complex business logic on top of your SQL statements, and that would port from machine to machine. Write it once, run it everywhere. Everybody thinks that message means Java, but it really means PL SQL. So PL SQL is procedural. If this, then that, loops, case statements, etc., case expressions. It's all about giving commands to the compiler to execute in sequence to get something done. It's algorithm, it's procedural, it's not set oriented. which is good. They're both very powerful approaches. But what's really cool, and a lot of people aren't aware, is that within PL SQL, there are also set-oriented features. And most of them are oriented around a collection type called nested tables. So there are 3 types of collections in PL SQL because we made it more complicated than we should have done. So there are associative arrays, the oldest type of collection originally introduced in 7.3. And then there are nested tables and V-arrays added in the object relational model in Oracle 8. And all the set-oriented stuff is in nested tables. So nested tables, I guess I'm talking for a long time, but I'll try to keep you entertained. Nested tables are what are called multisets. And a multiset mathematically means that you can have more than one row that are duplicates. They don't have to be all unique rows of information. And there's no inherent order to the data. Order is not significant. Now, hopefully when I tell you that, something comes to mind immediately. So now it's time for a quiz. What in Oracle database, besides nested tables, are multisets? Can anybody think of something in Oracle database that is a multiset that can have multiples of the same thing? You can have duplicates, and there's no inherent order to the data. What could it be? What could it be? Come on, folks. I know you're out there.
Pop it in the comments.
Duplication is allowed. No inherent order. What is it? Well, I sprung that on them, didn't I?
They're thinking. Brian. Roldy, we know you're here.
I guess I'm going to do all the work today. So relational tables are multisets, right? It's as Krishna, thank you so much. So tables, famously, hopefully you remember when you write your SQL statements that there's no defined order to the data being returned by a select unless you provide an order by or rely on a feature that does order the data. So there still are some features that will. For example, the SQL union will always return things in order. It doesn't order by. But in general, for example, with group by used to do an ordering, but now we know we cannot depend on group by to do an order by. You need a group by and an order by. So that's a multiset. Nested tables in theory are multisets, no inherent order, and you can have duplicates. Now, no inherent order also essentially means there's no indexing. But if you used a nested table, and I'll show you the code in a second to make this clear, if you've used a nested table, you know that you can cheat. You actually can use an index value just like with an associative array. And you can put things in index value 1 and then index value 2 and 3 and 4. So the index is made available to us, but you also can use and manipulate nested tables without using that index. And that's what I want to talk about today. So sure, let's go ahead and show my screen. Let's go over to LiveSQL. So as you hopefully know, if you've been attending any of my shows, I love to use LiveSQL. I've thrown up about 250 scripts into LiveSQL with all sorts of PL SQL features. So just about any time I talk about anything or you read and see anything about PL SQL out there, core features of PL SQL, there's a good chance you'll find examples here. So I will type in multiset. And then you'll see a bunch of different examples of things. Now, so let's just dive in. So first of all, you know about union, intersect, and minus, I'm sure. So those are SQL set operations. But you can also do multiset, union, intersect, and except. For some reason, not minus. I don't know why they didn't use the same keyword. Within PL SQL itself, as well as SQL. So for example, let's just run through a quick example. Conceptually, it's pretty easy. So once I show you a few, you'll get the idea. I'm going to declare a nested table of strings. We know it's a nested table because it does not say index by. That's the associative array or index by table. I've got a package spec. I declare a few different nested tables of the same type. My favorite authors, my wife's favorite authors, my son's favorite authors. That's what they're going to hold. And I've got a little helper program to show authors. And here again, we're cheating. This is a nested table. It's a multiset, but I can iterate through the elements in the collection and display them. Then I'm going to initialize my authors. So here are some of my favorite authors. You've actually seen some of these presented to you in the past, and you'll see these books as we go. In fact, I may change my mind about which book to show you and pick one of these authors today. And then Viva has a smaller subset, and then Eli has a different subset. Okay, so multi-set operations are really easy to use in PL SQL. I can take this collection, multi-set union it, to this collection. And then I can show the results. You can also do multiset union in SQL. So this is a feature that's connected to nested tables, not to PL SQL. Anywhere you can use a nested table, you can use these multiset features. So you can even do it inside a SQL context. And then, for example, you can also say multiset union distinct. So one other thing to point out, and again, this is a quick tip environment. You're going to say, oh, I love this feature. Then you will explore it in detail. But one of the differences between SQL union and multiset union is that multiset union by default preserves duplicates. SQL union gets rid of duplicates. You have to do a union all to avoid the select distinct, essentially. And that's a little trick you need to be aware of, because you can be paying a price for the comparisons and distincting, making them distinct for a SQL union. So with multiset union, you'll preserve duplicates. Multiset union distinct gets rid of duplicates. And then we can see the results. We won't go into all the details of looking at the results. Hopefully you get the idea. So that's the core concept for the tip today. We can just take a look at another one, and I'll show you some other really cool set-oriented features. Again, for some reason, they didn't go with minus. They went with except. Again, no idea why. But you can say multiset except, and that's this list minus this list. Or you can say multiset except distinct. So again, even with except, if I have duplicates in my initial set, those duplicates will still be there after I do my multiset except. And then intersect does what you'd expect intersect to do. Okay, so that's the core tip. Now, those are probably the most important and useful conceptually, that you can actually take these different data sets and union them, minus them, intersect them. But you can do more than that. So for example, there's something called sub-multiset. There are a bunch of operators that are available, again, only for nested tables. So I can say, is this array completely contained in this other array? I can ask if this is a sub-multiset of this. Is it not sub-multiset? So those are really convenient operators. You can also do set. I don't think I have a LiveSQL script, so I'll show you in SQL Developer. Hopefully that's big enough to see. If I have a nested table, here's a nested table with no duplicates. But if I union them, then I have duplicates. Anyway, what I can say is turn it into a distinct set of values. So simply apply the set operator that changes from a multiset, multiple values, potentially, to a set without multiple same values. And you can also ask, is it a set? Is it not a set? So I hope you're getting the idea. High-level declarative statements to replace what would be a lot of code. If I need to look at this nested table and ask, is everything in this one and this one? You're talking about loops within loops and comparisons, and what about who knows what? So much simpler to manage this sort of stuff. Okay, let's see if I have anything else here I want to cover. Now, there are, of course, many different nuances to using multi-sets. I'm just scratching the surface just to give you a sense of where it can get quite complicated, is that if you're doing comparisons between object types or between nested tables, let's see, is this? Oh no, this is different. So this points out a couple of other features. So you also have member of and cardinality and is empty. So in some cases, what you're looking at are duplication with existing methods. So you can ask for the count of a nested table without using the count method. You can say, give me the cardinality of this nested table. You can also ask, is it empty, which is the same thing as if count equals 0. And member of will sweep through that nested table and tell you whether or not that value is found in the nested table. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago on a tip, or maybe it was one of our internals. At least through 18C or 19C, member of was notoriously slow when you used it inside SQL, but it was fine in PL SQL. I haven't yet checked in 21C, but it's something you want to test. Member of in PL SQL, no problem. And again, that replaces going through a loop of the nested table asking, is my value equal to this one? Is it equal to this one? Is it equal to this one? You just say, is it a member of? All right, please stop showing my screen. That's set operations inside a procedural language. Questions, comments? I've got Krishna asked about next Vishal, list ag. Oh, I think maybe those were ideas for
Yes.
other
Wait,
multi.
it was. Mm-hmm.
So the multi-set that I know in the database besides nested tables are relational tables, and of course views and stuff like that. But I don't list ag as an operator, so that wouldn't in itself be a multi-set. And next, I'm not sure what you mean. Next is the name of a method that you can use with nested tables in V-arrays and associative arrays, but in itself is not a set or a multi-set. So the bottom line, really, and I think I did raise this idea a few weeks ago, probably when we were talking about, lazy, when being lazy is good.
Good lazy, bad lazy, yeah.
If you're writing a piece of code with, let's say, associative arrays, so if you've been around Oracle for a while, like I have, associative arrays, they used to be called PL/SQL tables, then index by tables, then associative arrays, when string indexing was added to the feature. That was my go-to collection. It was the only one that was around for years, so I used it all the time. Love them. They have many unique characteristics themselves. Maybe we'll do a whole separate talk on sparse collections, actually, in a coming tip. And so I was not quick to switch over to nested tables and start using them in PL/SQL. So I would find myself literally writing an algorithm. I need to see if this value is in this array. And it really took me a while to stop and ask that classic question that all developers should always ask themselves.
Could there be a better way?
Somebody must have done this before. The first place to look is inside the database itself, not Googling, not going to Twitter and saying, hey, Twitter, anybody write a PL/SQL program to compare one collection to another? No, you don't want to do that. Check the doc first, check the feature set, and see what's there. And you'll save yourself a lot of trouble. Their code will run faster. There's a really good chance that their code will have fewer bugs than yours do. Not that there are no bugs in Oracle database or PL/SQL, but since they're writing code for millions of people to use, they probably do more testing than we do of most of our code. So I'd say whenever you can, use a built-in, and in this case, use these great operators.
And explore LiveSQL. I think for me, this has been one of the most eye-opening parts of Feuertips in general, is just seeing how much there is there to explore. And Stephen, what I love about these tips, and you've alluded to it, is you're teaching us, you're sharing new ideas, new concepts, or concepts that we might not be aware of, and then inviting us to go spend time to explore and practice and play. I'm really looking forward to playing more with, here we've got a comment. These set operators, I think there's so many times when it would have helped me in code that.
Thank you, Niels. In fact, I was starting to go into map and order methods, and then I realized, wait a minute, that's not really what I wanted to talk about here. But you're right. So if I have a nested table of object types, then things can get tricky when you want to do a combination, a multi-set operation that involves looking at comparing the actual values. So thank you, Nils, for getting me back on track with that. Why don't you go ahead and share my screen, and we'll take a look at that for a moment.
Yes, I will do that.
Let's see, map.
So I'm probably mispronouncing his name, but Wouter, I hope I've said that right, says he's never used multiset, but he will look into it.
Excellent. So many of you probably don't have much experience with object types, but an object type is kind of like Oracle's class, and an object-oriented language. So I can have object types and then sub-object types within them and so on. I can have a nested table of this type of object. It's kind of like a collection of records. And the thing is, if you do any operation on an instance of that object type that involves comparison, is this object type instance equal to this object type instance, or do a multi-set union distinct? If I do a distinct, it has to look at the values to decide if they're equal or not. If you try to do that, you have to declare a special kind of map member function or order member function on that object type, so that you're basically giving the rules to Oracle about how to compare these things. So that's what Niels was referring to there. And we can come back to that in some detail in the future. It can get very tricky, but the bottom line is that if you don't have one of these map member functions or order member functions declared, and you try to do these operations that require comparisons, then it will give you an error telling you that map or order is missing. Thank you, Niels, for that. You can stop. Thank you. And do we have other? Never used
No,
multiset.
Wouter was just saying that I can call him Woody.
Excellent. Yes. All
I
right.
don't, yeah,
So
I don't see any
while
other comments.
people are coming up with even more amazing comments, let's see, there are two more things we want to do today. One is share another book and also offer a charity. So you can think about who to ask to pick a charity, and I will pick a book. Back to my bookcase. Not going to pick one of my orange books. So one of the authors I mentioned is a guy named Christopher Alexander. So I will offer this book to you this week. It's called The Timeless Way of Building. Christopher Alexander, I think he's still alive. He's quite old at this point, must be in his 90s at least. He's a world famous architect. And he developed a pattern language for making buildings that basically improve the quality of life of people living in them. And he believes that there's this underlying pattern to how we build things, or how we should build things, so that they are basically fitting into the organic space in a way that makes us feel more alive. He talked about it being a quality of life that was unnameable or undescribable. He's a fascinating writer. He's written so many books. I used to have a lot more of them before I moved to North Carolina, and I shed them because they're big, heavy books. But Timeless Way of Building is all about architecture, but it will change the way you look at the world and live in it. And also, that book and many others, he wrote a book called A Pattern Language, spawned the pattern language sphere of analysis and influence within software. So when you hear about design patterns, that's it. Design patterns, I think Martin Fowler or Beck, sorry, haven't refreshed myself lately on it. Design patterns came from Christopher Alexander, an architect, because they said the same thing. There must be common patterns of the way we build things. There are good patterns and there are bad or anti-patterns. So you should know about design patterns, and it's even better to know about the foundation under that, because it will affect your entire life and the way you look at things. He also wrote a book about Oriental carpets, Persian carpets that hold.
Wow.
And it is certainly one of the most beautiful books I've seen. He's collected hundreds of carpets and analyzed them. And again, he takes this view of what makes a carpet stand out, that comes alive. And he talks about the patterns and colors within carpets that bring them to life. It's really something. And it's funny, when I went to Istanbul years ago, I had read these books and I was totally into it. But we had decided that we were going to move. This is a long time ago. We were going to move to Puerto Rico. Never did. And we had decided we're not going to buy anything new. We have to shed things, not acquire new things. I went into this carpet store. This is probably, I don't know, you folks can leave if you want to. Anyway, went into this carpet store in Istanbul city center. And I asked them, have you heard of Christopher Alexander? Like, oh, yes. Well, I'd like to see some carpets that might be along his lines. And they started bringing out these incredible carpets.
Really?
And of course, I wasn't going to buy a carpet. I told him right up front, I'm not going to buy a carpet. And
how many did you leave with?
The next hour or two, trying to get me to buy a carpet. And essentially, and he just kept bringing the price down and down. And I finally walked out without buying a carpet. And I felt so bad for this guy. And it would have been an amazing price. And they shipped them home, of course, for you. I got home and, my wife started buying stuff again. I could have gotten that carpet. Oh, well. So Timeless Way of Building, Christopher Alexander. It will change your life and the way you look at the world.
Do you know what I'm thinking, Stephen? We should add a section to your Feuertips page with your book recommendations in case people want to refer back to them. And I'm just popping it back up on the screen. Guys, this is a great place to go to check out, upcoming episodes. Stephen's been great about publishing blogs every week to accompany every tip. So this week's blog post is coming in the next couple of days, correct? We'll update
it should be up today, later today.
Okay, great.
Not too late.
Great. And if we go back to comments, if Brian, he's such a loyal fan. He's here all the time. Brian, if you're still here, we would like to invite you to pick this week's charity.
And share my screen,
if you're
please.
ready, I will share your screen.
So this week, I'm shaking it around a little bit. This week, I offer 3 different organizations. One is 350.org, which is one of the most active organizations in the U.S. I think they also have chapters around the world. And they actively campaign to stop fossil fuels, to stop funding of fossil fuels. Really fantastic organization. It was led for a number of years by a guy named Bill McKibben, who is a great writer and leader. And he's now passed it on to the younger folks. One of my perennial favorites, the Barham Killam Bear Center. So if you want to help make this go away, where's your screen? Come on.
Oh dear.
There we go. If you want to help
Oh.
rehabilitate wild bears and demonstrate their sentience and amazingness and how we're just like them and they're just like us. And finally, Center for Biological Diversity, because this is a group that focuses in a very different area. They spend a lot of their effort in the courts, suing governments to stop them from doing things that will drive species to extinction. I love them and love the work they're doing. So Brian, if you're still there, we'd love to hear what you think. CBD, Kill and Bear Center, 350.org. We'll wait a few seconds, and if not, then I just get.
He was here a minute ago, so I'm sure he's just thinking about it.
Okay.
And you know what I'll do, Stephen? I'm also going to update our your Feuertips page to sort of track, the different charities. Here Brian says he's a fan of renewable energy.
So 350.org it is, I believe. Great.
I would assume that as well. Thank you, Brian.
Stop sharing my screen. Okay. Thank you, Brian, for that. Thank you, employer Insum, for being willing to commit some additional dollars to help save our hurting planet. So that's it for today. And again, if any of you have an idea for a tip that you'd like to share, or even just get me to share it, pass it along. If you have an idea for a favorite book, happy to showcase your favorite books and also organizations. So I'm happy to turn this into a community effort as much as we can. And we'll see if that happens in the future. In the meantime, stay safe. I hope in your country, in your area, things are getting better regarding COVID, especially in India. Still a very bad situation there and many other places. So stay safe, stay masked, be careful, and we'll get through this. And happy PL SQL coding to everyone.
Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Bye.